Among the Jungle podcast, where we're expanding our perception of the plant kingdom. Welcome. I'm botanist and host Shai Kaina, and I would love for you to join me as I interview incredible plant people around the world to create an audio vault of inspiring botanical knowledge, all while harnessing a deeper connection between us and our natural world. If you're ready, it's time to inspire your wild. Welcome back, Jungle Dwellers, to episode number 24 of Among the Jungle podcast. This episode is very special to my heart, as this guest has been on my radar longer than any other. I came across her right after college. When I had worked pretty much all the horticultural jobs in my area, I started working in the art industry, my other love. I was working at the time as a graphic designer at a local print shop called Fleetwood Photo. And one day when I arrived at work, the owner had saved an article for me to look at. It was about this magical fairy woman who had created one of the most unique and magical events for a group of total strangers. And I knew in that moment I wanted to know her, and I wanted to be friends with her. She is Miss Wondersmith, and today we will learn about these events and more as we join her in the high deserts of Idaho to really begin viewing the world through the lens of wonder. We will explore the benefits of foraging, eating seasonally, and how it can lead you down a magical path of deepening your relationship with the wild kingdom. Today we will learn how to view the world through the lens of wonder, how to forage and eat with the seasons, and how to live an intentional life through ritual and ceremony. Show notes for this episode can be found at amongthejungle.com/024. Get ready to be inspired by every single word as we welcome Miss Wondersmith to the jungle.
Yeah, I'm so excited, especially after that great conversation we had, like pre-interview. I was like, this is such a great conversation. Like, I hope it translates as well to interview. I'm sure it will.
Yeah, I would love for you to just, kind of tell us how you started on this whole journey of wonder and how you became Miss Wondersmith.
I became Miss Wondersmith because I decided that what I was putting out into the world felt more like a gift than a commodity. And it was really important to me to keep that energy with my artwork rather than to charge admission prices. So that's when I did a lot of introspective work about like what was important to me, how I wanted to communicate, what my main goals were, what my values were, and then started brainstorming ways to make that happen. And I'm really glad that I discovered Patreon, because now Patreon funds everything I do. It's this awesome situation where the people that can afford to support me do, but understand that they might not even directly benefit from attending one of my events. They just are happy to know that someone like me exists in the world doing what I do, which is really, really heartwarming all on its own. I have the best community ever.
That is so beautiful. And it's really awesome that Patreon has allowed that to be possible for people to be almost sponsored and sourced by the people who are just really passionate about what they're doing in the world. And just allowing you the opportunity to continue to spread your magic. So that's awesome, because I remember when I first found you in your website, you had a little, you were still by donation, but you had a little donation button on your website that people could donate to. So I'm happy that Patreon came around and became a platform for creators to really expand and not only have those patrons, but also share what they're creating with those patrons in a kind of intimate way.
Yeah, it's become a really amazing community too. Like I really didn't expect the amount of community feeling that comes from being on Patreon. It's really wonderful. And I've been on it for several years now. So it's kind of built up this relationship for me with all the people that are involved. It's beautiful. It really is.
That is so awesome. I just love anything that allows us to connect deeper. That's my big focus for the upcoming year, is finding deeper ways for us to take our social media relationships, kind of to another level. And Patreon allows that, that kind of filtered down to your really tight-knit community of supporters. What kind of offerings do you have on Patreon?
So the offerings change depending on what I'm working on and what my health is. Actually, today I've been drawing plants, which seems appropriate. But I'm working on a set of posters where each season will have a poster that will have a mandala in the middle of the poster and then surrounded by sketches of all the plants that I forage that time of year. And patrons can now sign up for a year-long membership and then get a poster every 3 months automatically. So they'll be able to collect like a year's worth of these, limited edition Patreon-only posters. So,
wow, that's really cool.
I'm excited about that one for sure.
So on your Patreon, you kind of roll out different projects?
Yeah, there are a few that remain pretty consistent. I try to do a monthly mandala at the end of each month, just as a way to kind of reflect on the month. It's sort of a personal ritual for myself, as well as then turning into something to share with my patrons as thanks. But most of my patrons aren't there for the merch or the prizes. Yeah. They're there to support me. And I learned that very strongly this year, actually. In August, my health was really poor and I needed to try some big medical interventions. And I just felt like trying to keep up with being the Wondersmith was going to get in the way of the healing I needed to do. So I was just really candid with my patrons and I said, I'm going to go on vacation mode, which means you won't get charged and I won't feel the pressure to create. And I'm just going to take this break. And I actually got a bunch of messages from my patrons telling me, don't you dare shut down. You're allowed to take a break for your health. We're supporting you as a person, not just what we physically get from you. And that was healing on so many levels for me.
As an artist, I think that's something we kind of struggle with, is this creation, from the heart, but also the receiving on the other end. So it's so nice to know that people are just out there supporting you and not expecting anything from you, just feeling your light.
To feel so humanized, to feel so seen and appreciated as like a person in this world. I think as artists, we do kind of walk this line between separating ourselves from the artwork and being the artwork. And that's a line I've been kind of experimenting with and being more vulnerable about my health issues or about my life or about my inspiration. And the result of that vulnerability has just been so much deeper connection with people, including my patrons. And I really do absolutely love my community. I think it's filled with wonderful, wonder-seeking and wonder-supporting people who can recognize the importance of kindness in the world, and that's why they're there.
Yes. And that is so important right now. I think that's another thing we've learned this year, if not anything, is that kindness knows no bounds, and the influence it can have, even not person to person, just even across digital medias or across the internet, across the ethers. There's so many ways to share kindness with each other, and that just ripples on and on and on and on.
Absolutely. And, I've been doing this for several years now, so I'm starting to see some of those ripples come back. So one of my favorite things is getting emails from people that have been inspired by a post or a recipe or an event, who then took that and created something else inspired by it, and it affected a whole community of people. And to know that those ripples really spread way more than you would ever imagine, way more than I ever imagined they would, and that they're returning to me in unexpected and deeply beautiful ways.
That is so awesome to be engaged with this community long enough to start to see some of those ripples come back. That's beautiful. What place does like ritual and ceremony hold for you? It seems like such a big thing in the way that you forage and then cook those ingredients and stylize the ingredient and every little piece of care that goes into it. And it just seems like one giant ritual of sorts. So I'm just curious what place ceremony and ritual have in your life.
Ceremony and ritual hold a huge place in my life. I think that they allow us a way of deeper connection to ourselves or to our community, to the natural world. They're a way to really focus in through a construct that's beautiful. And I've been fascinated by the common threads of ritual and ceremony throughout cultures, throughout time. I love that most cultures have some kind of celebration around the winter solstice or midwinter, because that seems like something humanity needs to get through a dark winter. So each event that I do is very ritualized. And I found that the more structured they are, weirdly, the more freedom you have. With structure, it allows the guests to understand what's going on. People like the structure of ritual, especially structures that are familiar to them, a lot. And the events that I've done that have been highly ritualized have been some of the most meaningful ones, whereas the events I have that are more akin to like, just show up and be here for a while, those ones leave me feeling like something is missing a little bit. And I think it's that we really need that framework to connect more deeply. And I need that framework to connect more deeply. So I approach ritual from a purely secular place. I think that the rituals I create can be used to connect more deeply to anyone's religion or spirituality or just nature or just themselves. And I think that growing up without the framework of religious rituals and ceremonies, I always felt like I was missing out on some kind of connection. And I found that through ritual. And for me, it's important to me that they are accessible for different belief systems, because I think it's strange that if you're trying to find ritual structures to connect to, they're so often tied to religions or spirituality that you might not personally ascribe to.
I feel the same way. I've studied a lot of religions and spirituality in my life, and being a more spiritual person, I found that incorporating rituals and ceremony into my life made everything so much more meaningful. It really made it so that I was like, not just being present in that moment, but treating everything like it was extraordinary and special and wonderful. I love in the spring and summer here, when I have lots of edible flowers growing, and it's like I get to decorate everything, like all of my salads and my tacos, and everything is just so joyful to put together. And taking that extra time to do it just seems like it makes the whole process, even the eating of a meal, more enjoyable. Just every single aspect of it becomes so purposeful and with so much more intention. And yeah, it just allowed me to be very grateful and present for each moment while, performing those rituals.
Oh, I agree. I think rituals hold huge purpose for just like emotional well-being and humanity in general, from the mundane of like, but it's not the mundane. It's like elevating the mundane. It's not,
Yes.
oh, I'm going to throw together dinner. It's, I'm going to go connect with these plants, and I'm going to, light a candle and turn on some music and put together a meal that's really beautiful. And then I'm going to sit down and eat it, rather than like, I'm going to grab a burrito and heat it up in the microwave and go. And so even those everyday kind of rituals are deeply powerful. And then there are the rituals of like celebrating major milestones, or doing deep internal work, or combating emotions that are difficult to process otherwise, like grief. One of the most profound experiences for me in understanding how important ritual and ceremony are to my life was being too ill to attend the funeral of a loved one and feeling like I needed closure. So I wrote my own ritual in honor of that person, and it allowed me to grieve in a way that felt a lot more connected. And it also, allowed me to feel more connected to that person as I completed the ritual.
There's so many ways that it applies to the things that happen in our everyday life, to big things like that, and even small and large wins along our journey. Sometimes we tend to overlook things. Growth is such a small progression that we tend to overlook a lot of the things that we've experienced over a year, over a period of time. And I think that when we treat life with more ceremony, we pay more attention to the small growth. We see more of those incremental growths versus just celebrating big wins and things like that at the end. We see more of those small things along the way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I love having some kind of ritual that's done on like a regular basis, like a full moon ritual, just because it allows me to check in with myself and think, okay, what do I want to hold on to? What do I want to pursue? What do I want to let go? And it allows me to move forward in my life in a way that's much more kind of focused in on what I want to be achieving, rather than just I wake up in the morning and I do this.
Yeah. The moon rituals are so helpful. They come at just the perfect time, like every 2 weeks, it's time to plant a seed or to reevaluate things, so on a monthly basis, you're planting new seeds, reevaluating, and it keeps a really good cycle going for the year. I think it's like perfect times to stop and do those two things. I'm kind of curious how you became the Wondersmith and what inspired your first event.
My interest in bringing people together for food began in college. I was a glass major, and the pieces that I was making were really textural, and I was designing them to be held. But nobody picks up glass pieces except for my classmates, who understood that glass is not as fragile as most people seem to think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But then I found that putting food in the glass pieces got people to pick them up. So I started hosting meals featuring, I would create a glass piece that spoke to some kind of environment, and then I would serve food in it that was from that environment. So like I made a lot of pieces with barnacles. So I would make a barnacle bowl. So when you held it in your hands, you'd feel the texture of barnacles in your palm. And then I would fill it with clam chowder, and see, if my friends that I was kind of testing it out on had a more informed eating experience. And soon I began to notice that my fascination with these gatherings wasn't just the vessels I was creating or the food I was creating. It was the interactions. It was the way that people were engaging with each other. So I had to drop out of school because I got really sick. And as I was healing, I started getting more into foraging, into wild plants, and eventually started doing commercial events where, I was selling tickets. And to create a pop-up event with like custom dinnerware, foraged food, high quality, everything is expensive. So these tickets were pretty high priced. And I did one in Oregon. I collaborated with a winery, a specific winemaker. His name is Nicholas Keeler. And I loved our collaboration. I loved working with him. I thought it was so fascinating that we would do these wine tastings and talk about how they related to the geologic story of the Willamette Valley. So it was kind of this geological exploration where, I designed the meal based on the story of the history of the valley, because that's what gives the wine produced there its flavor. It's the terroir of that environment. And so the thought that went into it was really beautiful. Working with Nicholas was fantastic. But the night of the event felt like something was off. A lot of the guests were more interested in taking Instagram photos of the experience than like really engaging in it. And I felt tremendous pressure because I was preparing food for people that had spent a lot of money on tickets, and I'm not a trained chef. I was working in like a small kitchen in the winery that's not designed to produce food for 100 people.
Right.
And I also kept getting treated like the waitress, which was a little bit frustrating. Nicholas was amazing at like giving me credit and saying this was a collaboration. This was her idea. I provided the wines. We talked about it. It was beautiful. But because I was younger and female, it was hard to get through that it was like my project. And at the end of the night, I just felt exhausted and drained. And like the people that attended it, for the most part, didn't really get where I was coming from. They just wanted to be able to say they'd gone to this weird artsy thing. So after feeling kind of lost, I decided to do exactly what I wanted to do, and as weird as I wanted to make it. And I painted ferns purple and wrote an invitation on them, and then put them out in the woods in clusters of like normal ferns, just far enough off the trail that you could see them. And my goal with that event was like, I don't want to only have guests that can afford this kind of ticket. I want people who are curious. I want to get curious people here, and I want to have dinner with them. And so the invitations themselves were kind of a test. It was like, who is going to see a purple fern and be like, what is that?
Yeah.
And investigate, and then be brave enough to go to a party held by someone they only knew as a lady fern. And I foraged most of the food myself, so I kept the grocery bills pretty low. I used artwork that I'd already created for something else. I decorated my backyard with twinkly lights and seed pods that I'd crystallized that were sparkling. I set up this banquet table, and it was one of the most amazing nights of my life. I had ages 6 to like 65. There were a couple young families. There were some like 20, 30 somethings. There were a couple retired couples, none of whom had met each other before that evening. And just seeing the way that they sparked magic in their conversation, and how even if something didn't go perfectly, it still felt magical because they were at this fairy dinner party from a fern they found in the woods. And so rather than this, like, am I living up to expectations anxiety, it was this like, oh, I'm giving this, and it feels so good to be able to give. And when that night wound down and everyone went home, I just remember sitting out on the back patio under those lights, just feeling higher than air. I felt like this is what it's supposed to feel like. And so that was the summer that I was determined to figure out how to make that happen consistently.
Wow, that is so magical. And how you described it is the energy I felt from the pictures seeing it. That was the first event I had seen in an article. I'm sure that probably got some publications. So I had seen that event, those purple ferns, in an article, and I was just like, wow, can you imagine just hiking along? And because I know my Aquarius brain, if it would have seen a purple fern leaf, it would have been like, wait, what is that over there? Go get it. So I was just like, wow, the way that just allows the universe to attract all the right cooperative components together, and all the pressure is really kind of eliminated in a lot of ways because you're just giving this beautiful gift. And it's up to them. If they show up, if they've committed to show up, they're already there to receive it. So
Exactly. It's like, it's kind of a collaboration with fate, and it's playful in that sense of like, I'm putting these out there. What'll happen?
yeah.
And then when the event is happening, I know that every person there has some quality that makes them seek out unique experiences. So they're already going to be an interesting, fascinating group of people. And I haven't had a single event since I've started doing it this way where I felt like the guest list was boring. I've met some incredible people doing this, and I've had some incredible experiences. And I'm like literally getting goosebumps talking about it right now.
Can you describe the one where you did in like the burned forest area?
Yeah. So that one was a little bit more reflective. Before I begin each event, I think really hard about what the goal is. Like, is this about play? Is this about allowing adults to act like children and like engage in that childlike wonder? And this one was about an opportunity to explore an ember. I was thinking a lot about embers. And to me, metaphorically, an ember is something that's kind of on the back burner, and you haven't committed to letting it go, and you haven't committed to following it. And so whether it's a relationship, a passion, some kind of pressure, I wanted to reach people that were looking for conversations about change. So for that event, I created little invitations that I tucked into self-help books in all the local bookstores. And that's how I reached my audience, because I knew that if they were looking at self-help books or books like Big Magic, they were looking for that conversation. And then I asked all my guests to drive an hour out into Idaho wilderness to the location of a recent forest fire. And I set up a banquet there and created all the food to look like it had been burned. So I used a lot of like black cocoa for the dessert and some charcoal in it, but surprisingly little charcoal in the dishes themselves. And we had this ceremonial tea party where a bunch of strangers once again came together over the shared connection of, one, being up for an absolutely crazy adventure, and two, wanting to have those conversations about change. And that event was, oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. Part of the ritual of that experience was having people think about their ember as they drove out through these burned woods and then write about it. And then we gathered in a circle, and there was, I had a shovel, and then I had a fire burning in a contained ring. And we went around and each person shared as much as they wanted to. I never want to force anybody to open up when they're not comfortable, but they shared whether, like, what their ember was to them and whether they were ready to put it in the fire, signifying I'm going to put more energy into this, or bury it and let it die and put it to rest. And it was amazing to see how the question of what is your ember was interpreted, personally, for me, it was a relationship that I felt I'd been trying to kind of keep alive, but just wasn't working. And so I was ready to just put that to rest and gently like move on. But for others, it was like their passion for music, and they'd been prioritizing other things over it. And they were ready to like commit to making time to engage in something that made them feel that spark of creativity, that aliveness. And some of them were extremely personal. I mean, they're all extremely personal because whether it's a passion or a relationship, those are big parts of life. But I think we all cried a couple of times.
I'm crying now.
Yeah, I know. I'm fighting it. Yeah, if I start thinking about specifically what those were, I'll definitely tear up. And there's something incredible about seeing this group of former strangers be so connected to each other's stories that like everyone, even like grown adults, tearing up at the humanity of each other, the struggle of each other, really seeing someone in a very vulnerable but beautiful place, and the surrealness of being at this tea party in the middle of this blackened forest, eating food that looks like it has already been burned. And I think that those aspects combine with the ritual to create something that's really deeply memorable. And that's my hope for each event. I want to make some kind of an impact, and I want to offer an opportunity for connection and an opportunity for exploration, but leave room for the personal experience, because people often connect with the events that I design in ways that I would never have expected.
When you're facilitating something like that, you are, I'm assuming with what you're saying now, offering, I guess, like the structure you mentioned earlier, offering some structure about allowing everything to really unfold naturally between everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, and it's an awareness of the energy of the event and the group of people and the guests. There have been times when I'm like, I think everybody's kind of over this stage. Let's move on. So it's that being fully present in this shared experience. But I take my role as the hostess / facilitator very seriously. And it's my job to make sure that everyone is having the best experience possible. So I really try to engage with my guests, to pay attention to where the energy's at. Sometimes I'll have like some really calm part, but the energy is just too high, so we just have fun. It really depends, but I do I follow kind of the structure of storytelling. Taking a class on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey was a very pivotal moment in how I create my events, because I realized that this is a structure that we all recognize so deeply down in us that we don't necessarily see it when it's happening. But every adventure movie we watch, there's that structure. And so I think of like, there's a call to adventure. That's the invitation. That's where you find the invitation. Do you accept? Then I think of like the threshold crossing. Driving out into the middle of burned woods is a major threshold crossing. Yeah. But even done more locally, is there something that can signify a threshold crossing? Even if it's like, as you enter this room, take off your shoes. That's a threshold crossing. And then this kind of ramping up to some crescendo, whether it's like the highest activity of the event, the highest emotion, the most intense part, and then winding down and sending them home with some kind of, I like to send them home with a physical reminder of what they've experienced. But the magical elixir that you return home with can be a newfound awareness of something about yourself or other people. It can be the memory of a crazy day spent with strangers doing weird things. And then usually kind of a quiet ending so there's space for contemplation as you re-enter the real world. It can be a little shocking to enter the real world again after a really immersive gathering. And so I try to make that re-entry as smooth and gentle as I can.
That's so considerate and just such a thoughtful layout because, like you said, storytelling is so natural for us humans, so integrated in our experience that it's something that we can flow with a lot easier. We kind of expect those different levels to happen, and that kind integration at the end, allowing people to integrate back into the regular world. Because you're right, immersive experiences like that, experiences where you just get around your people, they can be overwhelming and just, I don't know, set this incredible expectation of magic. And so that's a great thing to offer people.
It's kind of like going to the movies in the middle of the day and you come outside and the sun is shining and you're like, I expected it to be nighttime for some reason.
I so deeply resonate with that. My husband will be like, let's go to a matinee. And I'm like, I just feel really weird coming out of the movie theater during the day. There's just something not right about that. That's because so funny.
You've been taken on this journey. I mean, that's why we go to the movies, is to go on a journey. I think the goal is to let everybody leave with some change in perspective. One of my favorite pieces of feedback I've heard was someone came up to me after a meal where there was a lot of foraged food, and they said, I am never going to look at the woods again. Like, even if I never learned to forage or recognize, I've seen how you picked food out of literally everywhere. And now the forest is a place of bounty. And I'm always going to look at it as a place of bounty rather than just a landscape to move through. And that, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that again, that is so rewarding. That is so much of like my heart work, is showing that our connection to nature can be and should be so much deeper than it is.
And when you deepen that connection, you begin to see how abundant the earth is. This lack mindset can start to deteriorate when you really see that there is so much the earth is providing. We tend to, focus in on a few things that we really like, but there's so much available to us out there that's edible and that can really just expand our knowledge of the natural world and then our compassion for it.
Absolutely. I mean, the more you know about the natural world, the more you love it, the more you want to protect it. But for me, it goes beyond that. I mean, I think we live in a scarcity society where we're always afraid that there won't be enough. There won't be enough resources. There won't be enough money. There won't be enough love. There won't be enough affection. And that, watching some of my friends get into foraging too, I've been able to witness the change that happened in me, where it's like the natural world is abundant. And when treated with respect, there are plenty of resources. And that abundance kind of seeds itself in me as like, I completely trust that giving my art and my experiences away is not denying myself abundance. It's the exact opposite. I absolutely believe that what I give will come back to me in whatever ways I need it to. And it has. I mean, I've been shown that over and over and over, that people want to support me simply because I'm willing to take that step of trust and give. And honestly, I have a lot of mentors to thank for that. I was really lucky to have had some really influential people in my life who showed me that giving, that someone who gives is never going to starve. They're just not. They will have a community that will have their back.
Yes.
And one of those mentors, her name's Darcy Williamson. She's an herbalist in McCall, Idaho. And she was who I apprenticed under as I was healing after I dropped out of school. And at the time, she was doing Apprentice Wednesdays, where we would come and we would help forage and process the wild medicine that she was gathering. And then, as payment, I put air quotes around payment, we would get this amazing knowledge of wild plants. And I never felt like I should be financially compensated for my work with her. I felt like this was an education that a lot of people probably pay a lot of money for. And Darcy also took me in on a more personal level, letting me be an apprentice that lived at her retreat center with the expectation that I would work when I was able to. And when I was not able to, rest was what I needed. And she made very, very clear that she did not expect me to earn my keep, that my presence was valued in itself and that I knew my limits, and she trusted that. And that incredible gift to me gave me a second chance at life, honestly. It was exactly what I needed as I was healing from a really severe period of physical trauma. And I saw her just give and give and give in so many ways to so many people. And then when her husband passed, there was a community of people to support her in any way she needed through that process. And having her model that, having her demonstrate community is so much more important than commercialization, has been a huge inspiration for me. And I'm hoping that by modeling it myself, it will help other people realize that giving and generosity are not ways down a path of scarcity. They are a path to abundance.
I'm just going to let everybody marinate on that for a second. Giving is the path to abundance. It's so true. And it's so beautiful that you had a mentor to show you that, because it sounds like that mentality right there has changed your life in so many ways for the better. That's a gift that gives every minute of every day your whole life. That is such a beautiful thing. And what an incredible person for creating a model like that, to share with people in a society the way it is now.
Yeah. Thinking about her makes me tear up every time, just because I was one of many apprentices, and her influence on me helped me create the Wondersmith and the model that I use, this like gift economy model in a world that doesn't operate on a gift economy. But her and other mentors really showed me that it works and that it takes trust and patience and kindness, but it's magic. It is absolutely magic. I remember that she used to leave her studio unlocked, and I asked, like, aren't you worried someone's going to come steal your equipment or something? And she was like, no, I trust that if someone needs medicine, they will be able to pay me for it by leaving some money on the table, or they will pay me back later. I want to make sure that if someone's experiencing an emergency in the middle of the night, that they can have access to it, or that they can get in there if I'm not home. And I would often, as I was helping clean the studio, find little piles of cash like tucked under jars, to indicate that someone had come in and purchased something and left the cash behind. And usually it was more than the price of that item. But the way that she just trusted people to know what they needed and what they could give. And that's what I hope to do too.
I've always wondered,
if someone says, I have been abstaining from watching the videos you make because I can't be your patron. I'm like, no. That's completely against the point. Those are for you. The whole point of the Patreon program is to allow you access to these things. And if you get to a point in your life where you can afford it, awesome. If you never do, I have no hard feelings about it. And I'm happy that I'm able to share it with you. It's a hard concept for people to grasp sometimes.
On both ends, on the receiving end, on getting things for free, and, you know, on the aspect of giving. Both ends, it seems very unregular or very irregular.
Yeah, well, we live in a capitalistic society. That's what we're raised with. That's what is expected of us. And so creating a gift economy in the middle of that is confusing for some people.
And I love it. I'm here for it. Fully supported.
Me too. I love it too.
I always wonder when I see, this is, gifting economy in its most simplest form, but growing up in some rural agricultural areas, or there would always be these farmers that would just have like a big tractor trailer full of pumpkins in a jar, and you just pick a pumpkin and shove some cash in the jar. And I always wondered if they made more off of their pumpkins just because people loved the fact that trust was just like open-ended. I mean, I know I would shove a few extra dollars in there, and those were always the ones I wanted to stop at because it just seemed like this magical exchange of not just money, not just goods, but also this exchange of trust, which isn't as common in the commercial world. With the money exchange, people are often trying really hard to build your trust so they can get that money exchange. But when it just happens naturally in that gifting economy, so much trust is built just through that experience.
Yeah, I love that too. I also grew up in a very small agricultural community and would see that kind of thing all the time. Or like certain... I have to tell you about the pie lady. Can I tell you about the pie lady?
Of course. Tell us.
So in my hometown, there was this woman who was known locally. Well, we called her Mrs. G, but most people knew her as the pie lady. And when I was a kid, she would exercise in the school because it was too icy outside. So she would come in like her monochrome track sets and give out like 300 hugs to every kid in school. But as she got older, she found her passion in life was baking pies. And she was really good at it. Like she stopped entering the state fair because she just kept winning. And wanted to give other people a chance. But she donated every single pie she made to some local cause. So like if a sports team was fundraising to get to state or to get new uniforms, or if I was fundraising to go to like an extracurricular activity that was a competition that was out of state, she would donate pies and she'd donate them just for sale. She would donate them to auctions. And one of my favorite things was that, when there was like a town function that was some kind of fundraiser, there was usually a Mrs. G pie. And the most beautiful thing would happen. The pie would be up for auction and someone would buy it and then donate it back. And then someone would buy it and then donate it back. And it would go through like 6 iterations until it had raised like thousands of dollars for a pie. And then those winners would get together and split it. And that was just like something that happened in my town. And
what is this magical town? Where is this magical town?
I mean, right? Isn't that magical?
What?
And the other thing about
so crazy magical.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I have her pie crust recipe, by the way. That makes me feel very honored.
Yes.
She taught it to me personally, which was really, really sweet of her. But she was just such a generous person, and she was really funny too. And she would often ask like a high school boy to accompany her, to be her date to these functions. And normally if like someone's grandmother asked a high school boy to be their date, they would be like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. But every single guy in my class was the one that was like, oh, I hope Mrs. G picks me, because she was just that revered and that loved. And her woodshed was never empty. And when we would go huckleberry picking, we would always pick an extra quart for Mrs. G, and so would everybody that went huckleberry picking.
Oh my
And so she was
gosh.
just provided for, because she was this town treasure and she was so generous and loved that how would you not save your huckleberries for her?
Wow. It sounds like foraging has had all these different roots for you that have brought you back to giving, that have brought you back to building community, that have brought you back to fulfilling wonder. It seems like foraging has been such a profound thing in your overall experience.
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't made that connection between like Mrs. G as an example and Darcy Williamson as an example, but it's true that foraging was a huge component of both of those relationships, and continues to be. I think that when you go out and you pick something yourself and you think about things like sustainability, how much of this can I take without threatening its survival, without taking more than my share, without depleting animals that are reliant on this. And you put in the time and effort to process, harvest, package, preserve, that it becomes a piece of your heart, and it's not something that is taken lightly. I love being able to gift foraged foods to my friends or to introduce them to foraging, especially because I know that if I'm able to introduce them to it, I can explain why it's meaningful and what's important and how to do it with reverence, rather than just go out and see food and take it.
Yes, exactly. And it becomes a bonding experience between you as well. What tips do you have for people who are just kind of getting into foraging? It's seed starting season, friends, and I'm not making the same mistakes I made last year. If you remember, I purchased cheap, unbalanced lights online to start my seeds, and after waiting all that time for the trays to germinate, I began to notice my seedlings were looking super leggy. That's when I was inspired to take a deeper look at my lights, which wound up being completely unbalanced and caused me to have to scratch all my trays and start over, getting a late start in the garden. Fast forward to this year. I've been using Sono Farms. That's S-O-N-O Farm, a system I actually trust to grow strong seedlings. But that's not all I'm using it for. I've also been using this incredible light to rehabilitate unhealthy houseplants and experiment with new plants I've never had enough light to have indoors before, like palms, crotons, and a variegated pink lemon tree. The grow panels are easy to install, have adjustable light settings, and give the full spectrum of light required for healthy plant growth. Sono Farm is offering 10% off to listeners using the link in the show notes or in the bio of any of our social medias. Give your houseplants the light they need to thrive and your seedlings the best start possible for a bountiful harvest this fall. What tips do you have for people who are just kind of getting into foraging? Because it's a word that is really being thrown around a lot. This year, of course, foraging has been popular in tons of communities forever. But with the big wave in plants becoming more trendy, things like foraging are also becoming more widespread. And what suggestions do you have for people kind of getting started in that?
Well, the first thing to address is safety. Definitely. You need to make sure that you're like 100% confident in your identification of a plant before you consume it. and if it has any specific ways it needs to be processed, if it has any poisonous lookalikes, if there are certain parts of the plant that are edible, but others that are not. And that information can be learned through guidebooks, through trusted online resources. I think it's best to learn in person when that's possible, just because factors like smell and texture play a big role in plant identification for me. So safety is the first really important one. Don't just go out and pick mushrooms.
And just to kind of piggyback off of that, typically locally, I know at the botanical garden we have here in Anchorage, our botanical garden offers seasonal workshops that take you out and teach you about mushroom foraging or berry picking. So there might be gardens or your wildlife and fishery, different departments locally that might offer some hands-on educational courses to help you start getting familiar with your local area.
Yeah, university extension offices are also a great resource.
The greatest resource.
Yeah, they're amazing. So there are a lot of ways to learn that. But the second thing, but it's equally important to the first, is respect. You want to make sure that you're foraging on land that you have permission to be on, that you have permits when needed, and that you're aware of the life cycle of a plant so you know what's sustainable and what's not. Generally, I will never take more than 10% of anything. And there are exceptions to that on both ends. There's some plants I know that take 7 years to reproduce. And so I'm not going to take one plant if I only see 3 of them. I'm going to wait until I see a huge population, or I'm not going to take it at all. And the overharvesting of plants like ramps is a huge issue in creating sustainable environments. Part of being a forager is being a spokesperson for the forest, for the wilds. If you notice a population decreasing, save the seeds and plant some more. If you want ramps, purchase some bulbs from a sustainable grower and plant them in your backyard or in your favorite area of the woods, and know that you can manage that population. Additionally, I think it's important to be respectful of local traditions and local people. I've learned quite a bit from the Native Americans that are indigenous to this area or to the areas that I've lived, and recognizing that they have so much more ancestral knowledge of land management is a really important conversation that thankfully is happening more and more in foraging circles right now. I think it's a conversation that should be happening way more than it is. Especially because due to genocide, they've lost a lot of that ancestral information. But when speaking about land management, I think we need to definitely include and listen to and let lead the people that have been doing land management way before I was here. So, yeah, that was kind of an aside, but I just want to emphasize how important it is to be respectful to the land, to the people that rely on the land, to the animals that rely on the land, and to the plants themselves. And to know that mushrooms, for example, are the fruiting bodies of plants. They're like apples on a tree. If you pick all the apples off of a tree, it won't hurt the tree. It might mean that there are less new apple trees that can grow from those apples. So understanding that about mushrooms, that the mycelium is the main organism and that mushrooms are just there to spread spores. So if you can harvest mushrooms in such a way that you're spreading spores, like picking them and putting them in a basket that has holes in it, you're helping to create a sustainable system where you can harvest a ton of mushrooms without hurting anything, and maybe even creating a bigger yield for the next year.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about how negative of an impact humans have on the environment. But what we're not talking enough about is how much of a positive impact we can have on the environment, like forest ecosystems, when we do things in a sustainable way. And it can be very small practices, like what you just said, carrying around a basket that's got holes in it so those spores can be released while you're foraging along. There's small things, but we can learn to be such a positive impact and leave so much more abundance behind us as we are foraging when we really begin to learn plants and their life cycles. One thing you mentioned on our phone call that I absolutely loved, and I have a tendency to do the same thing, is develop something that you called plant crushes, and which allows you to kind of really deepen a relationship with a particular plant. So do you kind of want to explain what that means to you?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I can't explain why this happens, but every year as I move through the seasons, I get these mad obsessions over a specific plant. And it turns out that's a really good way to learn foraging, is to start with one plant, learn everything you can about it. I usually start with research of like, okay, what parts of this plant are edible? Is this medicinal? What does it look like at different times of the year? How did indigenous people use it? Is it indigenous? Because a lot of what we think of as wild plants are introduced species. If it's not indigenous, where did it come from? And how did the culture in that part of the world use it historically? And then once I have a good understanding of like what's safe, what's edible, how does it need to be processed, I'll go out and spend some time with the plant and just kind of get to know it, get to feel the energy of it, get to smell it and just feel closer to it. And then I'll do a bunch of experiments in the kitchen. Like, what's it like if I infuse it in vinegar versus oil? What happens when it's mixed with sugar or salt? And I'll get a feel for these flavor profiles. And then I start to feel like I understand it in the same way that I understand black pepper. And it becomes a part of my repertoire and my wild food family. And yeah, I'll try all these different recipes, and I'll find some that don't work at all, and I'll find some that are like surprisingly amazing. And then that crush will kind of turn into just a friendship, just a recognition, and I'll start seeing that plant everywhere, and I'll start noticing it and noticing its abundance and feeling grateful for its existence. And then I'll get a crush on another plant, and the process repeats. But that allows me to really get to know all the facets of a plant and to feel super comfortable with it, to the point where I know more about that plant and how it can be used than you know about strawberries in the supermarket.
Yes. And it's amazing because that relationship with plants is so important. We don't think enough about, especially when we're interested in house plants and things like that. We think a lot about foliage. When we think about plants, we think a lot about like green, the leaves of a particular plant. But I think what herbs and the study of that really allows us to discover is that there are stems and there are leaves and there are roots and there are flowers and there are buds and there are seeds. And each one of those has a completely different purpose and even a different culinary purpose, potentially. And so there's so many aspects of plants other than just the leaves. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's so important when we want to use plants for foraging, knowing that, especially if you harvest a plant, that most of that you just harvested it for the flowers, but those leaves could also be utilized. You could be wasting a lot of material that could otherwise be used. I know for me this year, one of my plant crushes, wild plant crushes, was yarrow. I just got so into yarrow this year. There's tons of wild yarrow that grows all around our parks and everything here. It's just everywhere and in all different colors. And I just love it. So I'm curious, what was one of your plant crushes this year?
I think probably one of my biggest plant crushes lately has been cattails. Just because they are so much more versatile than anybody gives them credit for. Yeah, like they're in the spring, they have little shoots that can be eaten in salads or pickled. Obviously, you want to forage from like a really clean location because cattails are filters. Later in the year, they make the little green baby cattails, and those can be cooked as a vegetable. And on top of that, they make pollen. And when I say cattail pollen, I have to clarify because a lot of people think brown fluff. It is not the brown fluff. It is bright yellow. It is fine. It is floral. It smells like summertime. I love it. And I was able to get out foraging for some of it this summer, just wading through cattails and foraging pollen. And it was so much fun. And then something that I've been wanting to do and haven't had the chance to yet is to dig up the rhizome in the winter because it's really starchy and you can process it and pull the fibers out and let that material dry, and you'll get a starch that's similar to tapioca starch. So it can be used in like gluten-free baking. And then, non-food uses, you can weave the cattails into mats, baskets, like they're just every single part of that cattail plant can be used if you know what season to harvest the various components in and how to process them.
And that's
cattails are amazing.
And that's another great point right there, is not even just the edible purposes, but the other unique artisanal purposes or whatever it might be. There's so many ways that one plant can be used in so many different life stages, and plants are just invaluable. It's just a whole rabbit hole of magic. I'm curious how foraging has influenced your palate and how you have made recipes over time.
I have always been kind of an adventurous eater. Like I'll try anything once. And I've really loved getting to know the flavors of the areas that bring me peace. Foraging is a very meditative practice for me. And sometimes it's fun to go with friends, but I really enjoy just going alone sometimes and getting into that flow state of like picking delicious, delightful rose petals or like hearing berries plonk into a bucket. Or in the wintertime, people think that everything is dead, but I just sketched a whole bunch of plants that can be foraged midwinter. There's so much bounty out there every month of the year, every week, every day, something is changing. And foraging allows me to connect with those seasonal changes so much more. So I find myself eating more seasonally, both with what I'm foraging and what I'm purchasing.
Which is profound. Super healthy way to eat is seasonal.
Yeah. And I pay a lot more attention to it. I'm not going to buy strawberries in December. It's just not going to happen anymore. Because I know what good summer strawberries taste like, and I know what good summer wild strawberries taste like. And that's part of what makes them so precious, is that I think diets can become really monotonous if you eat the same thing, but eating seasonally means that it's constantly changing. And so I look forward to apple season, or I look forward to cherry season, or because it only comes around once a year, because you have to enjoy it while it's there. And some of the wild foods that I eat are even more hyper seasonal than what you find in the grocery store. And so, when it's time to harvest cattail pollen, it's time to put on your waders and go get cattail pollen, or you're not going to get any this year. Additionally, one of my favorite things to do is to adapt recipes from all over the world, from different cultures, from my background, into ones that are made with the same traditions and the same idea, but feature the plants that grow here. And I think that that's something cultures have been doing forever, and that some of our favorite foods are because of those changes, or because you take a recipe from this culture and you move that population of people here, and they're going to start using this plant because it's recognizable to them, but it's going to create something different. So one of the projects I've been kind of working on this fall is recreating traditional Basque tapas and I'm gonna pintinxos. I can't remember the word, but like Basque snacks. Boise, Idaho, where I live, has a big Basque population, which is a region in Spain, for anyone who doesn't know. So there's this beautiful Spanish influence, but I've been like, what if instead of making marinated button mushrooms, I make marinated chanterelle mushrooms? Or what if instead of just roasting my potatoes, I roast them on branches of fir so they get infused with that like kind of citrusy conifer flavor. And just finding ways of like, how can I adapt these traditional recipes to what I have available here in my environment? And what does that bring literally to the table? And those are really fun experiments. And that's something I love to do as I'm getting plant crushes, like learning that curly dock seed flour is very similar in flavor and texture to buckwheat. Then it's like, oh, so I can research buckwheat recipes and see which ones taste good with this instead.
Yes.
It's about that, building that relationship, building that familiarity, and then getting kind of playful with it.
Yeah, that's so fun. It's amazing the way that foraging opens so many doors to just living in harmony. The fact that when you start to forage and you start to become more interested in eating seasonally, that you realize that it also prevents you from abusing any particular food, which is usually where food-related problems come in. You know, we get attached to like one particular food and we tend to like eat it too much. And so seasonal eating really allows you to kind of treat things with moderation, appreciate them while they're around, anticipate the next time they're coming back around, and just kind of embrace each little micro season, not just the large 4 seasons, but all the little micro seasons, depending on wherever you live in the country, how many of those are. But when you're into foraging plants, things are changing every day, every week. I mean, it happens really fast.
I think another thing foraging does is it helps you appreciate plants that maybe wouldn't be appreciated otherwise. And then that kind of translates to a lot of different parts of life. Since I've moved to a city, I've been doing a lot more urban foraging, which usually means wandering around and seeing like a nice patch of weeds in someone's yard that looks real tasty, and then approaching them and being like, can I weed your lawn for you?
And do you spray pesticides?
I always ask that too. Yeah. Do you use pesticides? No. Cool. Okay. Can I like weed your garden for you today? And then usually they're like, why would you want to do that? And I'm like, well, because it's full of purslane and purslane is delicious and I love to eat it. And did you know that it has more omega-3s than any other plant? And they gave me a weird look and they're like, it's a weed though. And I'm like, it's a delicious one. Can I have it? And I haven't had anybody who's been like, no, you can't take my weeds.
Have all the weeds you want.
I have made it difficult for myself sometimes when I talk too much about how awesome the plant is.
Yeah,
and they're like,
talk them back into keeping it.
Maybe I do want to try that. But in that case, like,
they learn something new.
Great. Yeah. It's sharing something amazing. So I've been doing a lot more invasivore eating, which is another trend kind of in the foraging community that I hope continues to spread because it's awesome.
Yes. Please explain this to people who don't know what this is.
So invasivore eating is eating invasive plants. It's looking at the weeds that people throw away, or worse, use pesticides or herbicides to get rid of, and saying that would be delicious. Why would you spray that with chemicals if you could just eat it instead? And a lot of people just don't realize that like the dandelions growing in their yard have all kinds of nutritional and medicinal benefits,
Mm.
or that the weeds in their garden bed maybe taste better than the crop they're trying to grow.
Yeah, we harvested every dandelion that grew up in our yard or garden this year, either for our purposes or for our chickens, because it's their very favorite snack.
And there's probably a reason for that, because dandelions are really nutritional.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I love going to the community garden because I can weed it and go eat the weeds, and everybody's like, "Oh, thanks for helping." And I'm like, "Thanks for dinner."
Yeah, one thing, we have something up here in Alaska called vetch, and it is very, very invasive. It's taking over everywhere. And this year, it's so beautiful, the little purple flowers it gets. But this year, I learned that you can make jellies from it. And I was just so inspired. And then I really came onto this concept of foraging for these invasive species, which just makes so much sense. It's just another simple way that we can have such a positive, profound impact on natural environments, forest environments, because it's really easy to get information on invasive species because forestry, the forestry website, extension office, they want you to know what out there is invasive so we don't keep spreading it. So there's tons of information on what you could be looking into, and then, doing your own research as to how you could use those particular plants. But
a lot of the most common garden weeds are edible. And honestly, I prefer a lot of them to like what's growing in the garden.
Yeah.
Like invasivore salads are amazing. They're super delicious. You can get all kinds of different textures and flavors. It's way more exciting than like lettuce.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is definitely, and it's especially a bigger part of my life living in a more urban setting. But even out in the woods, there are still invasive species that have traveled and taken over areas. And the great thing about invasive species is like you can harvest as much as you want. You're helping the local ecology by harvesting it. So if you want to haul a big harvest of, I can't get purslane out of my head. I'm craving it now. But if you want to make a big purslane haul, it's considered an invasive species in many areas. And the alternative is either it gets thrown on a compost heap, which isn't the worst thing, or it gets herbicides, which
and more commonly herbicides, because a lot of places don't want to put weeds into compost where it could potentially reseed itself. Right. So some will, larger composts that aren't for like gardening, but sometimes it can either just be harvested and sent to landfills, which don't really break down, or like you're saying. But it's awesome that you could get so much bigger, really, in a lot of cases, hauls from harvesting these invasive species, because they seem to just, grow so rampant wherever they found to become invasive. They're having a good time there, which is why they've become invasive. So you can almost harvest in more abundance when harvesting invasive species, I would say, than
absolutely
some other native species.
Yeah, and living in Oregon, the Himalayan blackberries are really invasive and really aggressive, but they're also really delicious. So I was amazed at how easy it was, even in an urban setting, to find blackberry bushes dripping with the most delicious, delectable, free blackberries, and then to go to the farmer's market and see them priced at like $8 a pint. And I'm like, they're everywhere. Not that you shouldn't support your local 100%. Growers, but like, oh my gosh, there's free food everywhere and nobody is taking advantage of it at all.
Yes. I am always noticing free food. My husband and I are constantly having the conversation, especially when I moved up here to Alaska and saw how much foraging is available. I was just like, babe, do you think that the earth provides like enough food already for everyone to eat? Like outside of agriculture, if we knew what we could eat and could come up with a good sustainable system. And at first he was like, He's like, no, I don't think so. But after our first fall here, where, all the berries and rose hips and it's just mushrooms, it's just like everything here is you can eat. The trees, sap's coming out of, it's just like everything is so edible. He's like, I think maybe the earth does provide enough food for everything. Like, I think so if we just knew maybe how to use it.
I remember when I was living in Oregon and my family came out to visit me and we spent a day on the coast. I had a shellfish permit, so I went and harvested some mussels and we got a bunch of like fiddleheads and nettles, and I cooked them up a dinner that was like 90% foraged. I mean, I think we had like some bread and butter on the side and some wine, and that was it. And my dad, as he's eating, he's like, it would be hard to starve in Oregon. All you have to do is lay down and chew.
Yes.
And I was like, well, maybe a little more complicated than that, but like, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
This is an incredibly bountiful area.
Yeah, I think that we see the Pacific Northwest as, I think that's why we're also, no matter where you are in the country, you're just kind of like attracted to the lush greenness of the Pacific Northwest. And yeah, I think a lot of that is just something innate, like the biophilia inside of us. It's just like, it's just so lush and abundant with natural wonders.
So abundant.
That we're just so attracted to it.
But even, I mean, I live in the high desert of Idaho, and I've been really surprised at how abundant life is here, how I can forage 365 days of the year if I wanted to. And I think that, the Pacific Northwest rainforest is kind of the poster child for foraging, right? Because it's so abundant, and it really, I mean, it's magical. I love being able to visit sometimes and just go in the woods and be like, food everywhere.
Yeah,
everywhere. But, even here, there's so much to be found and enjoyed and eaten that people have no idea about.
Yeah.
And I love being able to share recipes that are kind of special occasion foods to show that wild foods are not just a subsistence diet. They can absolutely be part of that. But they can also be celebrated. They can be special items. And the work that you put into foraging, I always feel like if I'm going to forage something, I want to do something special with it. I want to make a recipe that really honors it. And so my focus in developing recipes is creating those like feast-worthy, special occasion, kind of artistic kinds of food. But you can totally just throw some greens into a skillet and cook them up and eat them, and they're amazing.
Well, you have mastered the art of beautiful food design. Honestly,
Thanks.
Everything. The other day, I just took my husband through. I'm like, and look at this crab, and look at this thing. Look at these bats. These are noodles, and there's an olive in the center. I'm like, and look at this incredible thing. It's just so magical. The way that you've allowed the natural world to just inspire all these beautiful creations. So that really leads me to ask about your legacy project and what you're working on.
Yeah. So one of my biggest projects that I've been working on is a series of books. And I want to enhance that connection to the natural world and just that feeling of connection in general. So on my blog, I've been pairing recipes with writings about something that feels good for the soul, this kind of like soul food, but not in the like Southern food sense.
Yeah.
Like food for the soul.
Yeah.
And then physical food. And I've been working on this series of books where I'm encouraging readers to tap into the energy of any given season. I'm giving them rituals that will help them do that, recipes that require focus, time, commitment, kind of cooking as self-care. And I've been working on them for about 3 years. It's a little bit, my health is pretty poor. Honestly, I've got some some severe chronic illness issues. So there will be months where I can't do anything, and then a month where it's more bountiful for me. So it kind of evens out over time. But yeah, my long-term goal is to self-publish these 4 books that will be like absolutely heirloom quality books. I want hard covers, beautiful full-page photography, and I'm using Patreon to help fund the production of them. So when I'm ready to hire an editor, layout designer, botanist to check the botanical names of all of the plants that I'm using in those books, all the various people that would be involved in producing a high quality book that's ready for publishing. And then by doing it through Patreon rather than doing a Kickstarter, it gives me time to polish them into something I'm really proud of and to stay really connected to my vision of them. And yeah, really make something that feels really good to make. And then once the books are like to the point where I have physical proofs in my hand, then I'll launch a Kickstarter, and that will be how I manage pre-orders and that kind of thing, the actual printing costs of the book. But the production costs beforehand are coming from Patreon, just because I know my working style, I know my body, I know that when periods of rest are needed, I have to respect that. So working in a way that feels more sustainable with myself and with nature. I'm not going to work on the March chapter in August. I'm just not. It doesn't feel right. I need to be writing and designing and cooking and photographing in the month that I'm currently in, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And it sounds like that's what your patrons would love as well, because that's what they're there supporting you for, is this beautiful dream that you have.
Yeah, so the title of the Legacy Projects came up earlier this year when I was pretty concerned about my health. I had just gotten a new diagnosis that is incurable and difficult to treat. And I was feeling like I was at a dead end. Several of my specialists and doctors that help me manage chronic illness were like, we have nothing else for you to try. Even the more alternative practitioners I was seeing were feeling really lost. And since then, I've unearthed other resources and other options, and I'm feeling a lot more hopeful. But I have had several near-death experiences, and I am significantly disabled by my health. So there is this kind of internal clock ticking for me of like, I really want to focus on what I'm able to leave behind when I go, whether that's in 2 years or 80. And nobody's promised tomorrow. I know that, but I've definitely got some factors working against me. And when I was in that period of fear and grief, what kept me going was thinking like, what do I want to leave behind? And that became something to focus on rather than worrying about how soon my life might end. So I'm really grateful that I've found that hope again, and that I've got more treatment options on the horizon, and that I'm not, worried that I'm going to be gone in 6 months. But, having those near-death experiences and those health scares definitely have changed my perspective about what I want to be putting my energy and my time into. And that is part of the story of the Wondersmith. Absolutely. In 2013, when I dropped out of college and started working with the herbalist, it was because I almost died. And, being around plants and around generosity, it made me feel like my purpose in life was figuring out how to share the wonder of that with other people.
Thank you for sharing that vulnerability with us. It's beautiful to see how your passion has just kept your spark so brightly lit in moving forward, no matter what obstacles have been put in front of you. This passion to create, and it's not even, it doesn't even seem like it's for you. Like, it's not even the passion just for you to create, but the passion for you to create things that positively influence, impact, and affect other people is really where your heart is focused. And that is the kind of energy that keeps people alive forever. And that is such a beautiful thing. And I'm so excited to see how that manifests into physical form through all these beautiful experiences you've had that are culminating together to create this legacy project, which might just be a first little step in your legacy project, right?
Right. I'm hoping that it is. I mean, I've never been like, okay, I'm ready to end now. Like, it's always been, I want to finish this project just in case. And if I finish it and my health is improving and I'm ready to embark on a new adventure, I am absolutely going to take that new adventure. Can I tell you about the near-death experience I had?
Yeah.
So that summer of 2013, when I was very ill, one of my symptoms is gastroparesis, which is the paralysis of the digestive system. So I hadn't been able to eat in about 2.5 months and was struggling even to stay hydrated. I was having like constant excruciating pain. And there were nights that I really thought I was going to die, to the point where I was writing goodbye letters to my family. And one of those nights, I had this sort of hallucination or vision of a tunnel. And I'm learning now just how universal that experience is, which is mind blowing. But yeah, it was this tunnel, and it was kind of swirling with spots of color. It was really beautiful, and I felt peaceful. I wasn't experiencing pain for the first time in 4 months, probably. And I think I had a choice that night. I think that if I had walked down the tunnel, I would have died. And I think that I absolutely could have chosen that. But there was something in me that said, "You're not finished yet. I'm not finished yet." And then I snapped back into my body very suddenly, and it was really painful. And there was part of me that was angry that I was back in this place of horrible pain. But as I healed and recovered and eventually got past, pain being just my only existence, it definitely made me think, like, why does part of me think I'm not finished here yet? What is left for me to do? And I think that if that version of me could see where I'm at and who I am and what I'm doing today, she would understand. It would make sense. She'd be like, "I see why we stuck around," or like why I stuck around. And I know it's cliche to say that like almost dying changed my life, but it did. I feel like I've gotten a couple second chances, third chances, fourth chances at life. And when I struggle to feel emotions like happiness, I can always feel purpose. And sometimes that's what keeps me going more than anything.
That is so beautiful. That's so beautiful. One of the questions I really wanted to ask during all this is what you continually do to keep the wonder alive through everything, through highs, through lows. And it kind of sounds like you just answered that. Your purpose.
Kind of. Yeah, I mean, I still go through long periods of time of pain and bed rest. I'm actually in the middle of a pretty bad flare-up right now. And I found that if I can find wonder when I'm hurting, then it's easy to find when I'm not. And I think that my relationship to creating beautiful food is very much related to my health issues. Food is something very precious to me because I don't get to eat every day. Right now, I actually have a PIC line in my arm, and I get fed by TPN nutrition, which means basically I'm getting all my nutritional needs through my arm vein, not through eating. And that's just something to keep me alive when my flares get so bad that I can't get my nutritional needs met by eating normally. And so I think about food as something precious, as something special. And you combine that with the heart-centered act of foraging, and it becomes very special, which is why I challenge myself to create recipes that are magical and beautiful and engaging and surprising, because that's what food is to me. And I'm hoping that I will get to a point where my symptoms are managed better and I'm able to eat more often and I'm able to go foraging more. And I don't know how that will change my relationship to food. I think it will be very interesting to see where my attention goes. But I know that no matter what happens, that wonder will be there and that wonder will lead me. And I absolutely trust it to take me where I need to be.
Well, I know for one, I am very much looking forward to watching everything that's ahead. It's been an absolute pleasure just watching your journey so far over the last several years that I've been observing from afar. And now to being able to actually connect with you and watch your journey on a daily basis on TikTok. And I love getting to share in your full experience, you being so vulnerable and open with your community. And it just allows more doors to open, more ways for us to connect to you. And it's so beautiful. I know I'm very much looking forward to everything that you have coming up. And I just love to share with everyone else where we can continue to pursue wonder with you, where we continue to follow you on your magical journey.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I'm very deeply honored to be here. And I don't know, every day I wake up thinking I can't believe I have such an incredible community of people that want to engage with what I'm doing. It means so much to me. I'm pretty active on social media. On Instagram, my username is Miss Wondersmith. On Facebook, my username is The Wondersmith. On TikTok, my username is The Wondersmith. And I'm on Patreon, patreon.com/The Wondersmith. And then I host everything on my website. You can find my blog, you can find the events that I've done, all that good stuff. And that's just thewondersmith.com.
And in your Patreon, you release recipes sometimes in there as well, don't you?
I do. Sometimes I share secret recipes with my patrons. That's just a way for me to say thanks for continually supporting me. I also, this is a bonus that doesn't come up super often, but I give them the first opportunity to purchase when I do sell apothecary products, which are usually when I write a recipe for the book, I make that recipe and then bottle it or whatever. So I sell those off as I make them in shop updates, and I give my patrons a 24-hour head start before I announce it to the public. Beautiful. And I just did one of those, and I thought I was being really sneaky posting the update in the middle of the night, but it was mostly sold out by morning.
Oh my gosh. I think I maybe saw pictures of the little things that you were creating. I was like, oh my gosh, those little bottles. She does nothing that is not absolutely spectacular and wonderful. They were so beautiful. If that's what you were referencing. They were all these cute little decorated bottles with little wax seal at the top. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that's one bonus that my patrons get. That's always, I never really think of it as a bonus. It's just a thank you to them. But it definitely made itself apparent this time because a lot of things sold out very quickly. But yeah, I just, they're my support system. They're my community. And so I give back to them in various unexpected ways when I'm able to. And doing the Etsy shop updates is really awesome because it gives me a little bit more financial flexibility to invest in big new projects, which I already have done. I've already bought the supplies for a new project to work on that is very much in line with my goals as the Wondersmith. So it's exciting.
Well, we're excited to find out what that's going to be. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story with us and just loading us with inspiration. No matter what is going on in life, you are proof that magic and wonder can be appreciated no matter what. And that is a skill that we can all afford to cultivate a little bit more of in our life. So just thank you for being an inspiration in absolutely every way.
Oh, you're going to make me cry now. Thank you so much.
We're not going to cry for the fourth time on this episode today.
It's been an absolute honor being here and such a fun conversation to have too. So thank you so much for having me.
What a heartfelt conversation on the magic of connecting to the natural world. And what an honor it is to spend an entire lifetime exploring the bounty of the plant kingdom. There is always more wonder to explore. The challenge for you this week is to share a photo of your current plant crush and tag us on Instagram. And be sure to keep up with me there, where I drop lives, challenges, and IGTVs, as well as TikTok at Among the Jungle, for short videos on plants, planet, and positivity. Also be sure to follow Miss Wondersmith at Miss Wondersmith on Instagram and TikTok. And the show notes for this episode can be found at amongthejungle.com/024. Be sure to share this episode with a friend you would love to go foraging with this spring. I hope this episode inspired your wild, and I hope you feel a deep sense of abundance, knowing that the earth provides all that we will ever need. We just have to learn to use what we need only while living in harmony. Until next week, jungle dwellers, love, light, and aloha. I am so grateful to the plants that bless this beautiful earth, and to you for choosing to nurture a wild place inside of your heart. I hope this episode inspired your wild, and I'd love to hear your feedback, suggestions for future guests, and other botanical notes at amongthejungle.com or Among the Jungle on Instagram. It's been lovely exploring this exotic world with you today, and I look forward to where the journey takes us next week. Mahalo for tuning in, and stay wild.